So Cora just gave a wonderful introduction to this next activity that we're going to do and talking about communication skills. And so we're going to give you all an opportunity to interact with one another in maybe a different way than you did last week. And so the name of this particular activity is called Speaker, Listener, Observer. And so what I'm going to do, and we're going to have a little bit of moving around here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you into two groups of three. Okay, and each one of the groups will have a speaker, a listener, and an observer. Okay, and so the different roles for each one of those particular pieces, speaker will talk about an experience that you've had in disclosing your HIV status to a family member or friend. Okay, and the result of that disclosure was positive. So I'd like for you all to kind of think about that. Okay, listeners, your job is to listen to the speaker's story, but we also want you to engage that speaker. We want you to use some of those communication skills that Cora just talked about. We want you to maybe restate some of the things that the speaker says, like for you to use some questions, open-ended questions to draw out the story a little bit more. We also want you to show the speaker that you are engaged in that conversation by your body language, so maybe you might lean forward, as they're saying, certain things in the story or not, just to let them know that you're hearing them. Now, the observers, what we would like for you to do is to observe the listener and to see if the listener is doing those things. Are they reflecting back to the speaker what they're hearing? Are they using open-ended questions? Are they using their body language to indicate that they are engaged in the story? Okay, so thinking back to that question, a time when you've disclosed to either a family member or friend your HIV status that resulted in a positive outcome. Could I get two volunteers to be speakers? Okay, Rudy, Mike, perfect. Okay, so you will be our speakers. I'd like for our speakers to be in the middle chair. So, Rudy, I'm going to ask you to change places with Ted. So if you all would switch. Okay. And Ted, I would like you to be the listener for Mike. So I'd like for you to, before we go there though, Alex, I'd like for you to be the listener for Rudy. Your two chairs will face one another. Okay. Now, Justin, Elliot, I want you to face Ted. Justin, I'd like for you to face Alex because you're going to be the observer. Okay, so I just need to make sure that you are able to see Alex. Elliot, can you see Ted okay? Okay, cool. Okay, so I think that we are set for the activity. Again, speakers, you are going to relate a story where you disclose your HIV status to a family member or a friend, and it resulted in a positive outcome, okay? Listeners, we talked about what you're going to do. You're going to engage your speaker, let them know that you're hearing them, and then observers, you're just going to keep an eye on the listeners and make sure they're doing their job, okay? Are you guys ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay. You got 3 minutes.
Okay. I guess I'll tell you the story about when I told my sister. So I lived a little ways away from my sister. So I decided that I guess it was about time to tell her. So I was really nervous, and I called her, and I told my sister I have HIV. And she was really quiet for, it seemed like forever, but it's probably just a couple of minutes. And she said, okay, let me call you back. I was like, okay. So I waited by the phone, and about 30 minutes later, she called back and she said, okay. And asked me questions about it and what she could do to help, and just really supportive about it.
Oh. So, I mean, like ever since that, like, how's she been? Like, how did she behave with you? Did it change the way you guys used to be?
No, not really. I mean, she comes, we live pretty far away from each other, but she comes and she helps with whatever she can. She comes to my house and she cooks for me and stuff and cleans my apartment and stuff. We're just always just trying to take care of me, really.
It's nice. And she hasn't said it to anybody else.
No, I was kind of worried about that actually because she's kind of the big mouth of the family, but she hasn't told anybody else, so that's good. Yeah. She really understands that it's really something that I need to tell them, not for them to hear from someone else.
Once you told her, like, how did you physically feel like?
Because she told me she was going to call me back, and thought I was going to throw up, because I didn't know what she was going to call back and say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she could have called back and said, I don't want to talk to you anymore,
Yeah.
So, but I'm very grateful to have her in my life. She helps me get through a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's great.
Let's take maybe about a minute to finish up the activity, and then we'll come back together as a large group.
Okay.
So you thought about telling any of the family members, or?
Yeah, I thought about telling my parents, but we're very Catholic families.
Me too.
So that's probably, I don't know if there's ever really a good time to tell Catholic parents that you have HIV,
Right.
but I just don't really think that I'm ready for that yet.
That's scary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Okay. It looks like we are about done. So let's come back together as a large group. So you guys can move your chairs back into position,
But stay in where you're seated. So.
but stay where your
Change
seat
that.
is. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this activity, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'm really kind of curious. So for those of you who are speakers, Mike, Rudy, did you feel like you were heard by your listeners?
Yeah.
Okay. What are the things that they did that showed you that they were engaged in your conversation?
Well, just the things that you'd said about active listening. I mean, he was
Okay.
sitting forward and nodded his head, and then Ted also asked follow-up questions and was engaged.
Very cool. Very cool. Rudy, what was your experience?
With our listener? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he kept his eye contact, and the questions he asked, with the story showed he was really listening to what I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So want to hear from our two listeners. What are the things that you did? What is the one thing that kind of stood out for you in that experience? What did you get a chance to practice as a part of those communication skills we talked about before?
Just staying active and actually listening to him, and just following the story through and see what he was saying,
Okay.
and finding out. And for me personally, how maybe if he's in the same situation that I might be in, well, what was the outcome of it?
Oh, okay. So you got maybe an example of what a disclosure might be that ended in a positive result.
Right.
Good. Okay. Ted.
Well, I noticed that I was doing things that I do anyway when I listen to people, and I think the main thing is the eye contact. Because
Yeah.
if you got someone looking over here and there, like I'm talking to you, so
Yeah.
I just definitely want to let them know I'm watching them, I'm listening to them,
Okay.
and of course with the follow-up questions, it's something they can elaborate on and not just something where it's kind of like a blow-off question.
Okay. Very good. So last but not least, our two observers. What did you observe that hasn't been discussed by either our speakers or our listeners? Elliot.
I saw Ted nodding his head
Okay.
to let him know
Yeah.
that he was listening and understanding what Mike was saying to him.
Okay.
I don't know. I was looking at his hands. He had his hands like this, which is a non-threatening way, I guess, of
Yeah.
holding your hands. He wasn't doing this or anything.
Which would be threatening. Huh?
Exactly.
Okay.
Great
Good.
observation skills there.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say, these are awesome observations. Anything you want to add in, Cora?
When I was watching Mike and Ted and Elliot, they were all three engaged in
Yeah.
their roles.
Yeah. there was just this kind of a dynamic between the two of you in the conversation that it didn't seem like anything else was actually going on. You were very much into hearing that story and listening and giving that feedback and that support. Okay, very good. So let me just kind of take a temperature though, real quick. How does everybody feel after doing that exercise, just generally?
That was really cool for me, just to realize that, I guess because you assigned the roles,
Yeah,
like your job is to listen.
yeah,
As opposed to, and I feel like I'm guilty of this a lot of times when I'm listening, I start formulating like, oh, what do I need to do? What do I need to say? What advice do I need to give?
yeah.
So you're kind of only half there because you're planning.
Processing.
And the fact that you said no, I felt like he was listening. He wasn't doing anything else, and he wasn't
Yeah.
getting his speech ready or about to tell me his story back to me.
Yeah,
He was just listening, and it felt rare, so that made me realize how cool it was.
Yeah.
Because that's not normal.
yeah. And really what, our two listeners were doing were really exhibiting awareness. Okay, they were aware of the stories you were telling. They were aware of the body language that was going on with the speakers. They were aware of the inflection, the emotion, and all of those kind of things. And it really goes back to what Cora was saying before. That's that first coping skill. Just being aware, understanding what's going on in your environment, and that's the first step to the next coping skill that we're going to talk about. So you guys did great.
Barriers.